Guys, welcome back. Today we're going to listen to people dragging heavy carts outside my door. No. Today we're going to keep talking about the Ogre Kingdoms, and we're going to pick up where we left off with the Great Maw. For many thousands of years, the ogres lived far to the east, in an area of great sweeping steppes. On the borders of far Cathay was a fertile grassland that spread endlessly across the horizon. And there the ogres thrived and multiplied. They lived in nomadic tribes that followed the plentiful herds of grazing beasts that roamed that open country. It is said that ogres learned the secret of fire and basic metalworking from their neighbors in Cathay, and there were no conflicts along their shared border. As more and more tribes stalked the steppes for food, it was only a matter of time before ogre raids entered into Cathay, and some ogres preyed upon their neighbors, even acquiring a preference for Cathayan flesh. With the peaceable relations eroding away, the celestial dragon emperor of the imperial palace of Cathay changed his opinions of the ogres. At this time a light appeared in the sky. At first it was visible only at night, but with each passing day the object grew brighter until it shone like a second sun. At night the blazing orb grew more luminous until it eclipsed the light of the twin moons. The glowing light crackled and spat above the plains and drove animals and monsters alike mad with fear. A corona of sickly green light shone as the comet daily grew closer, and fanciful observers even claimed that the new celestial body had a face, or, more accurately, a mouth. One fateful night, the comet slammed into the ogre homelands with such force that it was felt half the world away. All life around the impact site was obliterated in an instant. 2/3 of the ogre population was extinguished as if smote by an angry god. Only those near the edge of the plains escaped immediate destruction. The raging firestorms that followed the comet's fall incinerated everything for miles, and distant witnesses said that it seemed as if beasts of living flame hunted the lands. Could any have been close enough to peer into the massive crater, they would have seen that the comet had burrowed deep into the heart of the world. Not all the ogres were destroyed. Those farthest from the impact survived, but for them the worst was yet to come. The once vital plains were reduced to a searing desert of howling sandstorms and toxic mists. The grasslands were gone, the beast herds were dead, and there was nothing in this wasteland to provide nourishment. So the remaining ogres soon fell to starvation. Cannibalism quickly set in, and an unnatural hunger gnawed away at the once full bellies of the ogres. Perhaps the whole disaster was engineered by the Dragon Emperor's coven of astromancers, or perhaps it was some ill turn of fate that crashed the comet directly into the heart of their homeland. To the ogres, it seemed that a vengeful deity had fallen upon them, consuming all before it. A great and terrible maw that existed purely to feed. Thus, the insatiable and merciless god of the ogres was born. A harsh new era. The remaining ogres were greatly reduced in number, but the survivors proved to be the strongest of their species, for the week did not last long. With bellies aching from hunger, desperate tribes wandered the barrens, seeking any kind of sustenance, while keeping wary eyes on the sporadic storms that scoured the empty plains. Those without the muscle or fortitude to make it were soon eaten by their own tribes. Yet no matter how much the ogres gorged, they could never fully satisfy their eternal appetites. Mired in the barren wastes with no food and suffering endless hunger pangs, there was little choice for the survivors but to move elsewhere. A great cloud of poisonous vapors hung over the comet's wake, blocking all eastward routes towards Cathay, so the ogres were forced to travel into the unexplored west. The first prophet of the Maw. Ogre legend tells of Groth Onefinger, a prophet amongst his kind who, before departing the old lands, dared to lead his tribe on a journey across the deadly desert to look upon, and offer sacrifice to, this new and powerful god. It was no easy matter traveling to the collision site. Hunger, flesh-tearing cyclones, and nameless monsters plagued Groth and his tribe. As they neared the impact zone, the fierce winds suddenly changed. Instead of swirling aimlessly, the wind now rushed inwards towards the crater's hole. So strong was the pull that the ogres had to fight for every step, lest the intake suck them into the great pit. When Groth and his tribe reached the edge, hunkering down and gripping the edge for dear life, what they saw was astounding, and has since been depicted on countless gut plates and banners, and is forever etched into the consciousnesses of the ogre race. The gaping hole that stretched before Groth was immense, like some newly grown inland sea, except there was no water within, only empty and plummeting blackness. Its edge was filled with ridge upon ridge of jagged teeth and rippling, convulsing muscle that stretched down into vast nothingness. Here was a gullet so bottomless it could swallow the ogre race into oblivion, and still hunger for more. Groth and some few survivors returned with tales that filled the remaining ogres with awe. Thousands of years have passed, but many ogres still follow the footsteps of Groth, for the Great Maw exists there still, a vile, pulsing god visited upon the world by the vengeful heavens. Not all who take that journey return, for the trip is deadly. Where once vast herds grazed, now giant razor-limbed insects lurk, waiting to burst from under the wasted land to attack unwary prey. Large carrion birds ride high on the thermals above, keen eyes searching for their next meal. Most deadly of all, however, is the Great Maw itself, for it still hungers. The presence of the Great Maw writhes in the minds of all ogres, beckoning them to return, to stand upon that mighty precipice. So ogres have become a restless race, forever seeking to escape from that whisper in the back of their minds that pulls them back to their gluttonous yet insatiable god. Some ogres, those who have traveled around the globe, can even claim that there is another maw in the ocean on the far side of the world, a vast, fanged whirlpool that devours any ship that strays too close. Yet no distance is great enough to escape the pull and lure of the Great Maw. No ritual or feast can fully appease its eternal appetite, and, whilst it hungers still, its barbarous sons will feed and feed and feed until they consume the world. The Big Migration. The tribes that were not destroyed by the coming of the Great Maw at first remained in their homeland, but with naught but each other to eat in a land racked with unnatural storms. Many tyrants chose to lead their tribes away. The ogres headed westwards, beginning their ascent of the mountains of the ancient giant lands. The going was hard, for the ogres had to contend with frigid weather, avalanches, howling ice storms, and always the steep and precarious climb. It was the beasts of that land, however, that proved the most dangerous. For long years the ogres had enjoyed the bounty of the plains below, where fat herds proved easy hunting, and, of the few predators, the ogres were by far the largest and most fierce. This was no longer true in the high places of the world. During those grueling and steep marches, those ogres who straggled or fell behind were never seen again. Saber tusks, enormous hunting cats with long tusks for eviscerating prey, waited in ambush to pounce upon the unwary. Herds of shaggy rhinoxen and overly belligerent stone horns wandered the slopes, all too willing to flatten anything that strayed too close. During the frequent snow squalls, vision was reduced to only a few strides ahead. In the relative blindness, it was not unusual to hear the sounds of a great mauling near to hand, although further inspection would often reveal only bloody smears in the snow, a bath of gore, indicating the direction in which an ogre had been dragged off. At first, the cave openings seemed a welcome relief to the ogres, for even their tough hides could not withstand the endless cold of such high altitudes. However, though they longed for refuge, they soon learned to give the rocky fissures a wide berth, as more often than not, they proved to be the lairs of great clawed bear-like creatures that dreaded Morn fangs, or if the ogres were especially unlucky, an enormous cave drake or chimera. Ogre origins. Where exactly the ogres come from and how they fit with the other races of the world is a question many scholars have asked. Of course, such questions never occur to the ogres themselves, for they are not scholarly in the least, being unable to read or write. Ogres do value legends, often exaggerated tales of bravado told around campfires, and they do record major events with their cave drawings. But to an ogre, history means their last meal, and ancient history is the feast before that. They are far more concerned with obtaining their next repast than with debating how or why they came to be. Elven lore masters believe that the Old Ones, the mysterious beings who shaped so many of the creatures that walk the world, made the ogres to join the fight against the rising powers of chaos. However, the elves theorize that quite a bit was left unfinished with the race when the polar gates collapsed, ushering in a tide of chaos powers to the world. To the elves, this explains the rude and intolerably vulgar nature of the ogres, and hence the graceful rulers of Ulthuan generally disdain them as a lowly and dim-witted race. Human scholars, led by the strangely prophetic imperial philosopher Albrecht of Nuln, believe that ogres are a close kindred to the race of halflings, perhaps coming from some common stock, but somewhere in time splitting into two divergent species, perhaps through some foul mutation. There are many similarities. Both races are resistant to the effects of chaos. Both have a comparable and all-consuming need to search out their next meal, and both bear unusual behavioral traits. For the ogres, the need to smash and eat everything. For halflings, the compulsion to swipe anything not nailed down. I think, aside from the orcs, ogres might be the most racist army in Warhammer. The orcs being the African analogy, and the ogres being the steppe, like Mongolian Stan people. A feast of sky titans. Those ogres who made it past the first few peaks made a fateful discovery. The upper mountaintops were permanently wreathed in mists, but once that cloud cover was breached, it could be seen that those mighty mountains soared higher still, surely standing at the highest and steepest range in the world. There, above the clouds, the ogres first observed the sky titans and their vast herds. The Sky Titans were an ancient race, much taller and far more intelligent than the giants of today. The Sky Titans had hewn vast fortresses in the mountains themselves, blunt, megalithic citadels that overlooked shimmering seas of clouds, pierced by great islands of rock on which stood other castles. Hermetic by nature, the Sky Titans had long ago forgotten about the other races of the world, for they were content in their reclusive realm, hidden from others by the sheer inaccessible nature of the peaks and their shrouding cover of cloud. The Sky Titans rarely descended below the tree line, save only to tend their herds of cave beasts and enormous mammoths. It was these gargantuan beasts that the ogres first encountered, and the ravenous ogres at first thought that they had reached some golden realm of plenty, a veritable promised land of red meat. They were utterly unprepared for herd animals as fierce and dangerous as these, however, and many ogres found that, instead of a gluttonous feast, they were instead gored by mighty tusks or stomped to death beneath a thunderous hooves. The ogres swiftly learned that the only way to pull down such creatures was to work together, separating a single beast from the pack, much as they had observed the giant wolves hunting the snowy slopes. Noting the growing losses amongst their herds, the Sky Titans were soon made aware of this ugly new threat that had climbed the mountains to assail them. Although alarmed, the Sky Titans were far from helpless, and they unleashed lightning storms and avalanches, slaying many ogres and driving others off the mountainside to fall to their doom. Thus began what the ogres call the War in the Sky, pitting the last surviving ogre tribes against the Sky Titans. Always the attackers, the ogres surrounded and besieged each peak, while the Sky Titans defended their castles with enormous cannons, their largest and most loyal herd beasts, and, finally, their vast bodies, stomping upon ogres, or snatching them up and hurling them great distances, so they plummeted through the clouds and fell many miles to their deaths. Although their population had been drastically reduced, the ogres still outnumbered the Sky Titans by hundreds to one, and, what's more, the ogres attacked together in tribes, whilst the Sky Titans lived alone in their fortress-like peaks, too solitary to ever unite under a single banner. The war was a bitter one, but with every victory the ogres grew stronger, as every battle provided an absolute glut of flesh. One by one the isolated mountaintop keeps fell, and bloody feasts took place in their colossal halls. The more fortunate victims were already dead when the eating began, but by no means all were so lucky. As the ogres rampaged further into the mountain range, they noticed that not only did the mountains tower ever taller, but that the Sky Titans also grew larger and larger. The most ancient of that long-lived race grew to enormous sizes. Yet over the great ages of their lives, the Sky Titans became ever more sedentary, until finally becoming like the mountains themselves. Many ogres believed that the final peaks they climbed in the ancient giant lands were not mountains at all, but instead the eldest of the Sky Titans, now permanently enthroned in living stone. If this was so, they were the last of their kind, for the ogres could find no more, and they reckoned that they had devoured the entire race, down to the last finger bone. There was rumor of the final few Sky Titans unfettering their mountaintops. I hope you can't hear that too loud. People have been dragging carts through the hall all week. There was rumor of the final few Sky Titans unfettering their mountaintops and sailing away on the clouds. But if this were true, none could say to where the refugees fled, or if they ever arrived there safely. The Shimmering Heights. Not content with destroying their foes utterly, the ogres slaughtered their herds of beasts and rampaged across the peaks, toppling castles into the valleys below. Today, only a few shattered stone shells and a wide scattering of immense ruins on the valley floors give any evidence of the once proud race of gentle giants, and the amazing heights they had reached with their architectural marvels. For a while, the ogres were contented to stay put, sprawling out atop the shattered halls of the Sky Titans, and dining on the dwindling and now shepherdless creatures. Yet there, on the very roof of the world, the ogres began feeling the ill effects of living at such heights. Great clouds of debris from the explosive coming of the Great Maw continued to be carried upon the winds from the east, and it fell heavily on those highest peaks. At night the skies shimmered with an unnatural aurora, and instinctively the ogres knew that they must press onwards. Some few foolhardy ones stayed, choosing to live up high, above the clouds, despite the premonitions many felt. Although ogres had proven particularly stubborn to the mutating effects of chaos, they are by no means immune. Over the centuries, the ogres that stayed to eke out a living amongst the dust-tainted sky castles regressed in nature until they became feral and bestial. They evolved white, shaggy fur, and long talons, and a new affinity for the harsh cold in which they lived. Thus was the mountain-top race of yetis born, and although rare, the abominable creatures have spread to many other high places in the world, where they prey on all who dare those frosty realms. A new homeland. As the majority of the ogre tribes descended the colossal mountains of the ancient giant lands, they headed further westwards into the range known as the Mountains of Morn. There the ogres found the air more wholesome, for the unnatural storms and their mutating effects spent their fury on the taller slopes they had left behind. The peaks and valleys of the Mountains of Morn were rich hunting grounds, harboring a dizzying profusion of creatures. The ogre tribes settled in, establishing lairs and campsites amidst the craggy valley floors. Although there were many battles to drive out monstrous creatures, and full-scale wars with tribes of greenskins, Skaven clans, and even a few far-flung dwarf mines that needed to be broken into and given a good scouring. Before long, the ogres came to dominate the lands so fully that the area became known as the Ogre Kingdoms. And that is where we are going to halt this video, because I don't know if you can hear it, but there's some thunking going on nearby. However, I want to see if, by any chance, there are rules for yetis, because I think a yeti army would be pretty sweet, or at least to have a component of your army be composed of yetis. It doesn't really look like it, although I can't say I'm surprised, given the way they established them. I don't know, that's too bad though. If I were to make an ogre army, that would be what I would make them. Oh, here they are, yetis. Sweet, they do have rules. That's awesome. Fear, flammable, swift stride, aura of frost. That's awesome. I wonder why nobody plays them. They must not be very good. Alright. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.